Oh, we've got a transcript.
Yes.
Good.
Then where we left off was in mid-December 2007, while Ed was an inpatient on Maple Ward at Severals Hospital. We have talked through the NEPT risk assessment that was dated the 9th of December 2007.
Yes.
And just to follow this chronology through, I understand, and you have understood from the records, that on the 12th of December 2007, the records note that Ed again expressed feelings that life was not worth living.
That's correct.
It was recorded that he was low in mood and an antidepressant was to be added to his medication regime.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
One of the things you tell us about, having been granted a short period of ground leave on the 19th of December, you tell us that a decision was taken on the 21st of December not to grant Ed home leave for Christmas. And I think you have particularly strong feelings about that. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think inevitably, as someone who has got to have many more Christmases and New Years, it's nice to spend them at home. I mean, and I'm not clear, obviously, on the clinical decision-making exactly that went on in that case, and I don't really want to second-guess it, but it's a little bit upsetting in the context of what was about to happen.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Essentially, in summary, the records show that Ed's mood remained low during the period up towards the end of December. Your parents visited him on the 29th.
Yep.
And then spoke to him by phone on the 30th, and that was when they were discussing the PlayStation that they wanted to bring to him.
Yeah, that's correct.
We know, Ben, that Ed took his life on the following day, the 31st, and that he died by ligature.
Yes.
That was the same day on which it had been recorded that there was some sort of altercation with another patient that we've discussed.
Yes.
And you told us in your commemorative account about police attending your home on New Year's Eve to tell you that Ed had died.
Yes.
I want to move on to some of the matters you've told us about and some of the concerns both that you raise and that were dealt with in the two reports you refer to. Those are the 7-day report and the full panel serious untoward incident or SUI report.
Okay.
I also want to talk to you about your recollections of the inquest into Ed's death and some of your comments on that, about your knowledge of the prosecution of the trust by the Health and Safety Executive much later, and then a little about Edward House before we move on to some of your recommendations. My understanding is that, as we've already discussed, the assessment that was carried out at Longview, which was Ed's first admission, and that was the adolescent unit, was particularly criticised by the SUI panel.
Yeah, so for example, I mean, the final word was no mental illness, which was, after the fact not correct. That had the effect of making it harder for my parents to access care for Ed. I think the findings, whilst acknowledging that it's difficult to diagnose maybe burgeoning psychotic illness in adolescent, the very fact that it's difficult to diagnose should be a warning sign that maybe that is a possibility rather than it being discounted because of the same reason.
And in fact, I think you tell us that clinicians consulted for the purposes of the inquest concluded that although it's fair to say that it's easier to diagnose in hindsight, there was sufficient evidence to suggest an emerging psychotic illness such as schizophrenia, and we've heard that had started to come up and be mentioned as a potential diagnosis.
Yeah, and obviously that had a knock-on effect in terms of, sorry, I muddled my words somewhat.
Not at all.
There was a lack of follow-up post that after he left Longview, which I guess was to some extent informed by
the conclusion that they'd reached that he wasn't suffering from any form of mental illness.
Exactly.
Yes. And I think for those reasons, a number of recommendations were made. in the SUI report about reviewing the evidence base for using the ink blot tests and the squiggle drawing test that we've spoken about.
Yes.
Auditing, that an audit should be carried out. If you're looking at it, I'm so sorry, I'm on page 21, paragraph 9.5, that an audit should be carried out of discharge summaries, that any reports should be signed and dated, and then, as we've just discussed, that early onset psychotic illness in adolescence can be very challenging to diagnose, but this really was about a lack of alertness to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the findings were that at Longview, certainly, and this is reflected in the fact that there was almost no follow-up, there was no indication that staff recognised the cumulative events and deterioration that led to what was later a very acute presentation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. The SUI report also, looking now at paragraph 6, found that the referral process from Wedgwood House to the Maple Ward at Severals had been what is described as haphazard and informal.
So, for example, there was no direct consultant-to-consultant discussion.
Yes.
Like on admission or as soon as possible thereafter, I think they recommended. There was no indication that the ward manager had any involvement in the referral process. I assume that that's the ward manager at the Maple unit.
Yes.
And there was no formal referral procedure, so there was like the scope for a lot of lack of clarity, I think.
Yes. In relation to those recommendations and the ones we've discussed about Longview, as far as you are aware, as of this date, were those actioned?
I'm not aware whether they were.
Thank you. One of the major areas that is of concern running through all of your evidence and all of the points you raise is around risk assessment and the adequacy or otherwise of risk assessment processes.
Yes, and that's both risk assessment in terms of patient care, but also environmental risk assessments.
Exactly. Well, if we deal with those in turn, if we look first at risk assessment in terms of patient care, and in particular a failure to properly assess risk or to acknowledge or understand the risk of suicidal intent or to acknowledge properly the history of suicidal intent. We know from your witness statement that the first report, the 7-day report, and this is on page 17 at paragraph 8.2, essentially concluded that all relevant procedures were carried out.
Yes.
Now, you comment there that this is in spite of the fact that all of the CPA care plans, there were 3, dated the 9th, 18th and 21st of December,
Yep.
from Ed's time in Severals Hospital, failed to reflect any reference at all to low mood, suicidal intent or a history of suicidal intent.
Yeah, and that's obviously despite evidence being available to the contrary in multiple regards.
Indeed. No new care plan was created after the 12th of December when...
He expressed low mood.
Yes, and an antidepressant was added to his medication regime. And in fact, when this matter was dealt with in the full panel SUI report, a number of findings were made in relation to inadequate risk assessment processes. That's, if you're trying to find it, that begins at page 22, paragraph 9.8.
Thank you.
So I think we mentioned it previously before lunch. The comprehensive 9-page Suffolk risk assessment that was on file and came with Ed to Maple Ward had been seen by 2 of the 9 staff who were interviewed, yes?
Yes.
5 out of those 9 staff were unaware of any risk of suicide.
And specifically, his care worker had not seen the risk assessment. His key worker.
His key worker had not seen the Suffolk risk assessment,
yes.
and in fact didn't see it until March 2008.
Correct.
It did not appear that risk had been discussed at any point during admission.
Yes.
And then a number of recommendations were made as a result around putting in place appropriate systems of clinical risk assessment, mandatory training on risk assessment, and ensuring that risk assessments were available on Carebase, on the electronic system.
I mean, I think it's also striking to me that Ed had been transferred to Maple Ward specifically because of risks. And it demonstrates like not only a lack of mechanisms to, have those risks available to the staff, but also a lack of curiosity as to why he might be there in the first place, which doesn't speak, I don't think, to particularly high quality care.
Yes, I understand one of the baseline reasons for his referral to Maple Ward having been suicidal ideation. Yes. All of this, of course, feeds into the matters we've already discussed about the return of Ed's belt and shoelaces to him on the 9th of December.
Yes.
Because there was what is described really as a fundamental lack of knowledge amongst staff across Maple Ward as to the risk that existed.
Yeah, and then, I mean, that date is 2 days after he was admitted to that ward. So, I mean, it seems to me that information should still have been present in the minds of whoever was making those decisions at that point.
Yes.
As even like a bare minimum.
Yes. In related comments, if you turn to page 24 of your witness statement and to paragraph 9.14, the SUI panel found that there was very little monitoring or recording of his depressive state in the notes and of his mood, and in exactly the same way that there was no record of suicidal intent or a previous attempt to take his own life, which would have very obviously been crucial information, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
You go on to talk in your witness statement about staffing and about very serious concerns around staffing, and those are matters that obviously bring in overlapping concerns around ward culture and ineffective risk management. One of the first things we discussed earlier today was that Ed's key worker worked night shifts.
That's right.
And you pointed out then that one of the things that the SUI panel concluded was that key worker primarily working night shifts made that process of ongoing assessment and planning particularly difficult.
Yeah.
If we look, please, at paragraph 9.16 of your witness statement,
Okay.
you tell us there that there were comments within the SUI report about the use of the bank system of staff, and that did very little to alleviate the pressures on the ward.
Yeah, and I think possibly it may have even hindered it. I recollect comments to the effect of it was possible to spend 2 hours at the beginning of a shift trying to obtain appropriate staffing levels, which was like a waste of time and obviously not time that you would be spending with patients.
Yes. And then at paragraph 9.17, you quote from the report, which actually says, looking at the second line, that the finding, the concern was, and I quote, that the current staff are unable to provide the care required within a PQ environment, particularly in light of the repeated assertion that there is little for clients to engage in on the ward.
Yeah, so more reference to a lack of therapeutic activities, but also fundamental problems with staffing levels.
Yes. There were recommendations around supervision of staff. If you go over to page 26 and to your paragraph 9.24, and what the report, again the SUI report, concluded was that although there was a supervision structure in place, it hadn't been implemented in any kind of appropriate or effective manner.
Yes.
In terms of ward culture, if we look at the summary you've given of the SUI panel's findings there at the bottom of page 26, The comments are, in terms of ward culture, institutionalised and of haughty superiority, with no therapeutic activity available.
Yeah, which are quite damning, I would suggest.
And tie in with your parents' impression of the environment on that ward.
That's
and
right.
Their attempts to give Ed some activities to take up his time.
That's right.
And then, in fact, recommendations were made about staff support. That's at paragraph 9.28, because staff interviewed were reported to be angry and disillusioned.
Yeah, subsequent to the debriefing session after his death, I presume. I don't have any further information about, I guess, in what specific way they were angry and disillusioned.
Yes. You make a point, and I'm looking now, you don't need to go to it, but if you wanted to, at page 37, paragraph 18.4, about what seemed to your parents to be, and what appears to you from the documents to be, a total lack of coordination of care on the ward.
Yeah, I mean, that's spoken to, I think, by multiple lines of evidence, like, no, you can't have headphones, yes, you can have your belt, no, there is no risk of suicide. Repeatedly, yes, there is a risk of suicide.
Yes.
Yeah.
Such that, in a way, I think the way that you've expressed it is that he was essentially left to his own devices.
Yeah.
And left, as a very young man, in an adult unit to fend for himself.
Which presumably was not conducive to his getting better.
Yes. Over on page 39, and this is at paragraph 20.5, you describe your parents' concerns about the staffing levels on Maple Ward being inadequate and incompetence. And that incompetence, one of the examples you give, is that the SUI panel heard evidence that there were staff nurses on the ward who did not know how to complete a care plan or a risk assessment.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, I mean, I think that speaks for itself, to be honest.
Yes. Turning to environmental risk assessment, and looking first, if you turn, Ben, to page 19 of your witness statement and to paragraph 8.8, the 7-day report deals with the issue of ligature points on Maple Ward, and essentially, in summary, tells us that the last ligature risk assessment had been carried out in October 2007.
That's right.
At which time it had been decided that no further remedial action was required.
That's right.
Nonetheless, the 7-day report made 4 recommendations, and you list those at paragraph 8.9, and 3 of those, at A to C, deal with fixed ligature points. A review is recommended on page 19.
Yeah.
Do you have it?
Yes.
On, a ligature review of Maple and another unit called Cedar is recommended. That's at 8.9A.
Yes.
It's recommended that existing curtain pelmets be removed and rails be replaced with suitable alternatives, and then that a full SUI panel is to be convened to look into the matter. And when that occurred, in summary, the SUI panel was given a great deal of conflicting information about audits or assessments of fixed ligature points on the ward. Is that your understanding?
That's my understanding. My understanding is that responses to those concerns varied from concerns about pelmets have not been raised to concerns have been raised but pelmets aren't a ligature risk, and other concerns which didn't agree with either of the first two, to the best of my recollection as well. So a really confused picture coming back from staff.
Yes.
And the SUI panel, I think, also went on to recommend that staffing levels in the risk management department were addressed as well. So, I mean, that obviously points to the possibility that the risk management department itself was not capable of performing its duties properly.
Yes. And in fact, the SUI panel also found that there were no written records in relation to those risk assessments, partly leading to this confused and contradictory picture with which they were provided by interviewing staff, because there were so many different recollections of what had been decided and what was needed and when. Is that right?
Yeah, and with no concrete evidence of what the facts might be.
Yes. If we go, please, to your page 25 and to paragraph 9.21, you make clear there that this is obviously a matter of significant concern for you and for your family, that this picture remains unclear.
Yeah.
You have sought further documents in relation to the HSE prosecution, which you hope might shed some light.
That's correct.
On the matter. And may then, as we said at the beginning of your evidence, want to give further comments about this particular aspect of your concerns.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it seems not just applicable to Ed's case. It would be nice for my own sense of well-being to understand most fully what had happened, but I think it also touches upon matters that are important in terms of the ability that the trust had to learn from these sorts of situations at a sort of broader level that would carry forward into the future and might inform, future care of patients, and whether or not that was even possible.
Yes, and I think in fact it overlaps with some of the other preliminary thoughts you have on recommendations for change. But one of the things you would like this inquiry to consider is this right. It is a proper mechanism for learning.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I can return to it when we discuss the HSE prosecution, but it seems quite clear that there isn't a mechanism for learning in this case.
Yes.
That these problems have reoccurred over a long period of time, and that's heartbreaking, basically. I mean, there's no need for this to happen once, really, but there's certainly no need for similar events to happen over and over again, and failings and learning from them should, I think, really be scrutinised, why they occurred.
Yes. One of the recommendations that the SUI panel made in relation to environment risk assessment and fixed ligature points was that urgent consideration be given to the re-provision of Maple Ward. And it's your understanding, I think, that this is part of what led to the establishment of Edward House. Is that right?
That's my understanding, yes.
Yes. Could you tell us, just in a sentence or two, what Edward House is?
Edward House, I think, is a low secure environment for people detained under the Mental Health Act that at the time of its opening was explained to me as offering all of the things that Ed's care lacked.
Yes.
At the time, so therapeutic activities, and I assume much safer environment and better staffing, I assume.
Yes, we'll come back to that. I'd like to ask you a little bit about the HSE prosecution, which took place in 2020 and 2021. My understanding is that you were only fairly vaguely aware of it at the time. Is that right?
I think that my parents mentioned that it was happening to me at the time, but that's the extent of my memory of it. I first became aware of it at the same time that I became aware of this inquiry, and subsequently I read the sentencing remarks after finding them, and those remarks are, I think, what spurred me to engage with you, and I think represent at the beginning of my understanding that these problems are likely systematic in nature.
Yes.
But at the time, I wasn't aware of it to any great extent.
Yes. You've read more about it now, and as we've said, there are documents from that prosecution that you're very keen to see.
Exactly.
Yes, I understand. Just turning for a moment to the inquest into Ed's death that took place in 2011, and you deal with this in section 10 of your witness statement.
Yep.
You've explained there that, as with some of the earlier events, your parents sought to protect you from a lot of it, but you were present for the inquest, is that right?
Yeah, I don't think I was protected particularly during the inquest.
Fine.
I missed certainly the first day of it, I think, because I had work commitments,
Yes.
but I was present for all of the rest of it, I believe. Yeah.
One of the things you tell us is that your family was not legally represented during those proceedings, but that the trust was legally represented.
That's correct. I don't know why we weren't. I retain a sense of my mum's anger about that inequality of arms.
Yes.
I think just at a basic level of justice, what was just, but also obviously, I think also like she had, I think she felt that taxpayers' money spent defending an institution that had failed her was, unjust, I think,
Yes.
when she wasn't able to meet them on their own terms.
Yes. That's helpful, not able to meet them on their own terms. And in fact, it is one of the matters that you record in your witness statement that you feel very strongly about, that inequality of arms has a very particular effect on families in those circumstances.
Yeah, well, I think I find it problematic in multiple ways. One is, I guess, like, to an extent, one feels guilty that one hasn't done the best job that one could to protect others. Like, that may not be reasonable, but it's still a feeling. Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Of course, I did. To be quite honest, I've forgotten what it was because I was listening to you. But we'll.
Can I ask you something? You shouldered the burden of the engagement with the inquest process. Was that right? You made the submissions on. I
made the submission, but we were, as a family, we shouldered the burden equally. In fact, my parents, I'm sure, asked more questions of witnesses than I did. But as a family, we shouldered the burden of asking questions of witnesses.
And did the coroner make that easy for you to ask those questions and to make your submissions, or don't
recall any sense that the coroner was acting in any way that was prejudicial to our interests.
I was just thinking about, I wasn't suggesting that so much as whether you felt able to engage, whether you felt overwhelmed by it, or whether you felt comfortable. How did that feel?
I can't speak to how my parents felt in terms of dealing with disclosure because I wasn't there. In terms of the in-person events, I think we felt okay about engaging with witnesses at the time, but for sure it was burdensome.
Yeah.
Like there was like it felt like a really large amount of dissonance, like one felt one was being asked to hold someone to account, which felt unjust because one was also dealing with the fact that this was incredibly painful on a personal level.
Yeah. Mm. Thank you.
And in fact, I think that's another of the matters that you've listed in your preliminary thoughts on recommendations for change, that a way be found to alleviate the burden on families at that particular time to try to hold a state institution to account in the midst of grief and hearing that evidence and all of the difficulties that brings.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, I feel strongly about it, and not just for my own sake, but because I think that that's not an efficient way of going about things, which is important for future patient safety.
Yes, I understand. At the time you wrote your witness statement, you did not have a copy of the record of inquest.
No.
But my understanding is that has very recently been provided to you by this inquiry and to your representatives.
That's correct.
So you were writing your witness statement, I'm so sorry, from memory.
Yes.
But we do have it, and what it records in terms of its conclusion is this: Edward Arthur Jackson killed himself whilst the balance of his mind was disturbed. The following factors more than minimally contributed to his death: ineffective communication, inadequate risk assessment, and lack of therapeutic activities.
That's right.
Now, you said earlier that as you begin to see documents in some ways or to a certain extent, it's reassuring because it sort of validates your own memory and what you had recollected.
Yes.
Is that true in this case?
Completely, yeah. So apart from two of the factors, I had more or less word-perfect recollection of the verdict, as it turns out. And it was reassuring to know that.
Yes. And all of those are matters which you cover in your evidence and which we're discussing today. One of the things you tell us is that you did have to prepare some submissions because representatives for the trust at Inquest essentially submitted to the coroner that neglect should not be left to the jury and that there should not be a narrative conclusion. And you, on behalf of your family, prepared submissions arguing against that. Is that right?
That's right. So when writing my witness statement, my recollections of the situation were based on the trust's legal representative's verbal arguments.
Yes.
So I remember her verbally arguing against neglect being a possibility.
Yes.
I don't remember, but am now aware that they argued against a narrative verdict. But, I mean, we argued for the possibility that the jury should be allowed to decide, because I think that felt most appropriate to us
Yes.
at the time. Yes, and I prepared those submissions.
Was any support provided, as far as you can recall, to you or your parents before, during or after the inquest?
Vague recollection of, from some direction, pointed towards therapy, but I'm really not in a position to comment what my parents might have received or not.
Fine. I understand. Could we talk a little, Ben, about Edward House?
Yes.
You've described what that is, and it was opened in August 2013. You understood, as you said, that essentially it was intended to be everything that Maple Ward was not.
Yes.
Modern and safe, indeed, light and therapeutic activities and psychological services. And you've set out a section there from the annual report in its opening year.
That's right.
You also tell us that thus far, and from the exhibits that this inquiry has disclosed to you, you're not aware of any deaths having taken place at Edward House.
That's correct.
But you are aware of a number of what we might describe as near misses and of a set of regulatory proceedings in terms of staff conduct.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little about what effect that has on you and what you are carrying in terms of that?
I mean, to be clear, I don't think that deaths or near misses at Edward House are more or less important than at any other trust ward. But they are more complicated for me to deal with because obviously it interacts with the loss of my brother more specifically. And it also, I suppose it feels that it's a more explicit breaking of the implicit promise of the facility if there is misconduct or a death there, to me personally. But I don't know. But to be clear, I mean, there shouldn't be deaths in any facility.
Yes. Thank you. Can we turn, there's a section of your witness statement where you've addressed some of the specific matters that the inquiry raised with you in Rule 9, in its Rule 9 request. And you start those comments on page 32 of your witness statement at paragraph 14.
Yep.
The first matter that you mention there is diagnosis. And I think we have covered the fact that, and you say this in fact in paragraph 14.2, as far as you can see it, looking back in hindsight, there's an almost 18-month period that appears to you to be a missed opportunity to have spotted an emerging psychotic illness.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there was a lack of certainty over that period that is later criticised by professionals. It contributed certainly at the time to my parents' distress.
Of course.
Because they didn't know what was going on. And I suppose one could argue that, well, it wasn't possible for anyone to know what was going on definitively, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't possible to have a clearer understanding than they had of the possibilities.
Yes.
And I think at some level they knew that at the time. That's the sense that I got from them, and I'm sure I had it too.
Yes. And as you've explained, the other effect was that it made it more difficult for your parents to access appropriate support for him.
Yeah, I think that that's true. I mean, it is also complicated by the fact that Ed didn't want support, not believing that he was ill.
Yes.
So it's worth acknowledging that, but that's also, I think, probably important to be aware of in these sorts of circumstances.
Of course, and we might think not necessarily uncommon either.
For sure.
You also raise here issues, and this is at paragraph 15 on page 34, around admission. And here I think really what you're referring back to is the failure to identify or to take into account the cumulative events and the deterioration that then led to a much later, a much more acute presentation.
Yes.
Is there anything more that you want to say about that?
Bear with me.
Of course, take your time. I think principally, Ben, it's in relation to Longview, isn't it?
It is. I mean, sorry. I'm not sure.
Please don't apologise.
I don't have anything further to add, I don't think, to my previous concerns about the fact that the diagnosis was misleading, certainly after the fact, that some of the criticisms of the behaviour of staff at Longview, like in terms of the tests, were like very painful to have played out in a coroner's court when they seem so obviously to be like not good clinical practice.
Yes.
And then obviously in a practical sense, as we've already discussed, Ed found it difficult, or my parents found it difficult to access care for Ed directly as a result of the care that he received at Longview.
Yes.
I believe.
Yes. The same is true, and this is something that we've noted at paragraph 16. You raise the concerns we've discussed about the follow-up from CAMS in Suffolk, which you consider to have been wholly inadequate.
Well, there was one appointment which I did not attend, and there was no follow-up,
Yes.
and that was criticised, I think.
And given the severity of how he was presenting at the time, that therefore came in for particular criticism.
That's correct.
Yes. In relation to, because we've heard that when the referral was made from Wedgwood House to Maple Ward, that was under an SLA between the Suffolk NHS Trust and NEPT.
Yes.
And what you have set out very helpfully in your witness statement are the particular concerns that your parents had about that service level agreement. And I think in particular in relation to due diligence, given what had been...
know.
Yes. Given what you now know about the fact that he was unsafe and the environment that they saw on Maple Ward.
Yeah, so Suffolk prepared submissions for the coroner's court where I think they more or less said that they weren't aware of any problems in Maple Ward, which
Yes.
raises concerns, multiple concerns. But at the inquest we heard, that, well, self-evidently Maple Ward wasn't fit for purpose, but also it shouldn't necessarily have been unknown to NEP that was the case, and therefore
Yes.
why didn't Suffolk know that as well, which is an important point.
Yes.
And I've seen correspondence from my parents to the Suffolk NHS Commissioner that says, that outlines all of their concerns and asks what has been done about it, why didn't you know? And all of this is in... my parents' motivation in doing that is clearly so that it doesn't happen to anyone else. And
Yes.
they sent a similar letter to social services in Suffolk when Ed was improperly sectioned,
Yes.
where they're explicit that this shouldn't happen to someone else's child.
Yes.
And it's just heartbreaking that they were in the position where they felt that they had to do that, like they were holding these people to account. And now it seems like it didn't, I don't know.
Go on.
It's like, it feels a little bit like the extent of the problems are such that it kind of diminishes your memory of what you were trying to do at the time. Maybe I phrased that badly. I'm
No, I
sort of
understand.
ad-libbing.
I don't think you phrased it badly at all. I understand. These matters and the particular concerns that your parents raised about the SLA and what due diligence was carried out, the answer to which appeared to be none unless particularly serious concerns were brought to our attention, are matters that in your witness statement you say that you would like this inquiry to investigate, yes?
I think so. Yes. I mean, one of the things that Suffolk responded was with suspending allocations to Maple Ward pending the review of the SUI and its recommendations. But we also now know that SUI recommendations don't necessarily really help. So what is the appropriate mechanism by which recommendations are implemented to maximise patient safety?
Yes.
I'm not convinced that it's an SUI by EPA in the 2000s.
Because as you've pointed out in some of what you say about a mechanism for learning, there were previous SUIs and those links not being made, rehashing conclusions in an SUI. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is that right? Am I?
Yeah, so for example, upon reading the HSE sentencing remarks, there are 12 deaths and 1 near miss. Ed is chronologically death number 3.
Yes.
There were 2 previous deaths in 2004. The sentencing remarks discuss that one SUI found that the ligature used had previously been identified but not removed. And for the other death, the SUI recommendations weren't implemented.
Yes.
Ed's SUI doesn't refer to either of the previous SUIs, and in the HSE prosecution alone there are 9 further deaths by ligature. So
Indeed.
it speaks to a complete inability to learn from previous events with like the most tragic outcome, and I don't really have the words to describe how not okay that is.
Yes. Thank you. One of the other things that I wanted to ask you about, we've spoken about the ward environment and staffing in relation to Maple Ward and Longview, in fact, in terms of diagnosis and the conclusions reached. One of the issues you raise more generally in relation to risk management, and Ben, this is at page 36, paragraph 18.1.
Thank you.
You talk about the missed opportunities to address ligature points, to safeguard him, and the failings in his clinical care and management that we have discussed.
Yes.
But you also go on to make comments about counsel to this inquiry's opening statement in April in relation to Dr. Davidson's and Ms. Nelligan's evidence.
I do. I watched it live. I haven't revisited it. My recollection, the note that I took at the time was they stated there is no such thing. There can be no such thing as a risk-free environment. So on the proviso that my memory was accurate, I found that really troubling, that proposition, because well, it lacks nuance to start with, but it felt to me like it had the possibility of excusing circumstances that was like so beyond the pale, so completely unacceptable, that it's a distraction to dealing with those situations. I mean, that was my personal feeling. It grated with me. It sat badly with me when I heard it.
Yes.
In the context of what I know about Ed's care.
Yes, I understand. Thank you. Ben, what I'd like to do now is to take you to the final section of your witness statement, which is titled Recommendations for Change, but I think it's important that we make clear that really, as far as you're concerned, these are preliminary thoughts because there's still evidence you wish to see, and of course there's other evidence that this inquiry will hear that may change your views or add to them.
That's absolutely correct.
So if we can go through those, the first... if we can go please to paragraph 21.3.
Yes.
There you tell us that thus far you've been quite unassured listening to the evidence of the trust. So tell us why.
I mean, it's a gut feeling, but like in the situation, it seemed like I think you'll understand that I wanted to listen to the trust and feel like everything was going to be okay,
Yes.
just as a natural urge. And for whatever reason, I didn't in the previous sessions, and I thought that that was worth commenting on,
Yes.
just from my own personal experience.
Yes. I understand. The first thought you give at paragraph 21.4 is that you consider that there should be a central record of all deaths and near misses in mental health settings.
I think that those data would make it so much easier to be able to evaluate where things need to change or whether they need to change. And it just seems to be a really sensible, parsimonious thing to have. And I know that Inquest submitted that that sort of record does exist in other contexts, for example in prisons.
Yes. That also feeds into what you have said about a mechanism for learning, because a central record would enable patterns to be spotted or matters to be picked up in a way that it appears to you at the moment. Yes.
Absolutely.
You say at the next paragraph, 21.5, that you support the submissions that were made by Inquest, that there should be a national oversight mechanism which is independent and can properly scrutinise the implementation of recommendations.
Yeah, I mean, I would just emphasise that the fact that there seems to have been no mechanism for learning in this case
Yes.
leads me to think that such a mechanism should exist, that it should be independent. I mean, I have no comments on it, what it looks like exactly, but I have a strong feeling that learning, like the ability to learn, needs to be baked into the system,
Yes.
such as it is.
Yes. And part of the structure, an inherent part of the structure.
Exactly.
One of the other things we've already touched on is the burden that is placed on families following deaths in these circumstances to hold institutions and or individuals to account and to sort of take up that fight, if I can put it in that way. And you refer here again to Miss Coles's evidence and the need to somehow find a way to alleviate that burden on families.
Yeah, and I think that there's, for two reasons. One is it seems unfair to those families themselves, but also I think that the current situation is not necessarily the best way to improve future patient safety.
Yes.
Such that, whilst you are grieving, you are not necessarily best placed to do the best job.
Of course.
Or you may be able to, but I'm not sure that's always going to be true in every case, and it should be.
Of course. And then at 21.7, you talk about equality of arms, and I think, unless there's anything that I've missed in relation to that point, I think we've covered it, have we?
Yes.
The other point that you raise, which I think is crucial, and it's at paragraph 21.8, is what I've in summary, it's the fact that you consider that the involvement of family members should be a core part of clinical decision making. Is that a fair summary?
I think that that's a fair summary. I mean, just the facts of Ed's care. My parents would have done anything for him, and that includes bringing him different trousers. Full stop.
Of course. You talk at the next paragraph, Ben, about a culture of institutional defensiveness. Can I take it from the evidence you've given thus far that you're talking across the board?
I am talking across the board from what I've seen in this inquiry, but also specifically, for example, the Trust's behaviour at Ed's inquest.
Yes.
Arguing against a neglect verdict.
Yes.
Arguing against the possibility that the jury should be allowed to decide what caused his death.
Yes.
It seems totally at odds. I understand why you would do it cynically, but it seems totally at odds with what their concerns should really have been.
Yes.
Which is the safety of all and future patients.
And candour.
Yeah.
And openness. Moving on, you note here that you would welcome recommendations that properly address whistleblowing safeguards.
My recollection of Sir Rob Berren's testimony was that, not necessarily in Essex, but a tactic is to refer whistleblowing doctors to the GMC. It's my memory. I hated that. That's also, in my opinion, to the extent that it's true, completely contradictory with patient safety.
Yes.
So I had a gut reaction against that when I heard it.
Yes, that's helpful. There appears to you to be scope, this is at 21.11, for recommendations about CAMS and transfer to adult services.
I mean, that based on my reviewing the documents, the facts of Ed's care seem to suggest that there were deficiencies in
Yes.
CAMS.
Can I just ask about that? You make it plain that the Maple Ward seemed a hostile environment, as it were, for your brother. Do you think that was something that was peculiarly difficult as an environment because of his age, or do you think it was universally a poor environment?
I would imagine, I mean, I never saw it. I would imagine it was universally a poor environment. I have concerns about the fact that he had just turned 18 and it wasn't an adult ward, and that he was targeted by another patient there. So I imagine my answer is a little bit of both.
Yeah.
But in terms of CAMS more specifically, I think the concerns are more about the engagement that he had with services after his first admission to hospital.
Yeah.
Yes. Moving to the bottom of page 41, you then, and I think we have covered this, talk about concerns about commissioning processes and that you would welcome the inquiry investigating that area further.
Yes.
And then last, you refer here to the chair's opening, to the April hearings, and her reference to the fact that the inquiry is minded to investigate the extent to which all suicides are preventable.
That's right. It chimed with me, and it chimed with me in the sense that I would like to understand better the extent to which that's true. I'm not presenting you with what I believe at this point, but
Yes.
I think that is a really important undertaking because I think it has the understanding of that has the potential to inform aspects of care, and I think that that's really important.
Yes. Ben, I think that I, for now, have come to the end of my questions for you. And unless the chair has any questions now, what I would propose is that we take a 5 or 10 minute break to see whether there are any further questions, and then perhaps come back.
Okay.
Chair, thank you. There are no more questions for Ben, and that therefore concludes his evidence.
Can I thank you very much indeed for coming to give evidence? It's really appreciated. Thank you.
Chair, next Adam Rowe will give his evidence. We're just taking a moment to pause for him to take to the witness box.
Thank you. Mr. Rowe, welcome. Please make yourself comfortable. Hello.
Sure, don't do it now. I, Adam Rowe, do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. They're not easy.
Sorry.
Please can you state your full name for the record?
Adam James Rowe.
You are the son of Amanda Susan Hitch, who was born on the 20th of October 1962 and died on the 12th of February 2022 at the age of 59. Is that right?
Yeah.
You would like me to refer to your mother as Mandy throughout my questions, is that right?
Correct.
And you would like me to call you Adam?
Mm-hmm.
For the record, sitting next to you is Maxine Rowe, your wife. She's sitting next to you for support and won't be answering any of my questions today. By way of background, the inquiry sent a Rule 9 request for evidence to you on the 24th of January this year. And in response to that request, you have provided a witness statement to this inquiry. You have a copy of that witness statement in the bundle in front of you. It is 21 pages long with a 2-page appendix listing documents that are within your possession. It is dated the 14th of May this year. If you'd like to turn to page 20 internally of that statement, please. You made a statement of truth and then you signed the witness statement over on page 21.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had the opportunity to read through that document recently?
Yes,
And are you happy that the contents are true and accurate to the best of your knowledge and belief?
I am.
Adam, that witness statement will therefore stand as your evidence to the inquiry. As you know, although I'm going to ask you some questions about it, I won't take you through line by line today. But please be assured that the Chair and the inquiry team have read and considered everything you say in that statement very carefully, and it will form part of the body of evidence on which the inquiry will rely. I would also like to acknowledge that you provided a commemorative and impact account in relation to your mother. You read out that account during the hearing last September, on the 24th of September. The inquiry is extremely grateful to you for that evidence, and I will ask you a couple of questions arising from that account today as well. I want to just remind you that I won't be asking you to name individual staff members today, so please try not to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Your evidence today will focus on your concerns in relation to Mandy's care and treatment under the care of ePut. If at any point during your evidence you require a break, please do tell me, and that's absolutely fine and possible. You're very clear in your witness statement that the dates and events that you've set out therein come from both your knowledge and also a review of the medical records and inquest documentation that you have in your possession and that you obtained since your mother died. Is that right?
Correct.
Before we begin, I'd like to set out a brief timeline of your mother's involvement with Essex Mental Health Services.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, I'll summarise the timeline and key dates, all taken from your witness statement. And at the end of my summary, I'll check that you agree with it. But please do stop me at any point if I summarise anything incorrectly. You have your statement in front of you, and please feel free to refer to it as you wish. I'll then move on to ask you about your concerns in relation to Mandy's care and treatment and your recommendations for the future. So as I understand it, according to your witness statement, you're now aware from your mother's medical records that she had a history of long-standing chronic mental health problems for which she was treated both as an inpatient and outpatient for many years. You first became aware of your mother's mental ill health around the time of your parents' separation in 2011, when you were 17 or 18 years old. Thank you. I can see you nodding, which is extremely helpful. If possible, would you mind also saying confirm. Yes, just for the purposes of the transcript? I know it doesn't feel natural. Thank you. Mandy was admitted to the Linden Centre in 2015 with symptoms of psychosis, and she told you that she was hearing voices and thought that buildings were moving and talking to her.
Yeah.
From that point on, she was in and out of hospital.
Yeah.
During an admission in 2017, you recall being told by the medical staff that the medication she had been prescribed was not having the desired effect and there was nothing more that could be done.
Correct.
On the 9th of July 2021, I'm looking at your paragraph 12 if you'd like to refer to it.
Yeah.
When your mother was being treated in the community, a meeting was convened between EPUT, British Transport Police, the National Rail Embedded Mental Health Nurse, your mother and her partner, as her mental health was deteriorating and her trips to railway stations were becoming more frequent.
Correct.
In January and February 2022, Mandy attended numerous outpatient appointments in relation to her mental health, and on multiple occasions she stated that she was actively feeling suicidal or low in mood and visiting the railway station with a view to jumping in front of a train. I'll go through some of those key instances now with you that you've set out in your statement.
Yeah.
Adam, I'm at your paragraph 16, if you're following along.
Yeah.
On the 4th of January 2022, she reported to her care coordinator that she was going to the train station when feeling suicidal, and at another appointment later that day, she said to a nurse that she felt low in mood all of the time.
Yeah.
On the 20th of January 2022, during a home visit from her care coordinator, she informed her she was going and sitting on the train platform again.
Yeah.
On the 24th of January 2022, you called her care coordinator because you were concerned about your mother sitting at train stations again, thinking if she runs and jumps, that will end her life.
Mm-hmm.
On the 28th of January 2022, your mother called her care coordinator as she was struggling to sleep, and it was noted that her presentation had deteriorated.
Yeah.
She was advised to call crisis if the sleep medication made no difference. I'm now at paragraph 27,
Yeah.
Adam, if you're following along. On the 31st of January 2022, your mother telephoned 111 and spoke to the crisis team, as she was having thoughts of going in front of a train and wasn't sleeping.
Correct.
A sanctuary support worker called later that day, and your mother disclosed an intention to kill herself that night. The call was passed to a manager, and your mother then indicated no intention to harm herself that night.
Mm-hmm.
On the 1st of February 2022, your mother saw a nurse for her monthly depot injection and reported suicidal intent and a specific plan to end her life by jumping in front of a train. She indicated she'd thought about doing it that day, but wasn't sure of the speeds. She later reported to a duty worker that she planned to jump in front of a train, maybe that day, when she goes home from seeing her friend and partner.
Correct.
The Home First team were contacted on that occasion, and it's recorded that Mandy was well known, so they didn't accept the request for referral. Instead, the records state that she would be followed up by her care coordinator the next day and have the planned consultant psychiatrist review the day after.
Correct.
On the 2nd of February 2022, she was seen by the duty team and reported thoughts of ending her life, but denied an active plan or intent to harm herself, and said she does not want to harm herself, but reported low mood, the same for 8 years.
Yeah.
Adam, I'm at paragraph 35 now.
Mm-hmm.
On the 3rd of February 2022, Mandy was seen for her planned medical review by her consultant psychiatrist. She said although she would like to act upon her thoughts of jumping in front of a train, she strongly denied any intention to do so. The risk was recorded as low at present, but unpredictable. This was your mother's last contact with an EPUC clinician prior to her death.
Correct.
You confirm that sadly on the 12th of February 2022, Mandy ended her life by jumping in front of a train, the very method that she had told services about during her contact with them in the weeks prior to her death.
Correct.
Adam, are you happy with that summary of the key chronology of dates and events that
Yes, I
I've
am.
taken from your witness statement?
Yeah, I think there were some other admissions that were in that time, but yes.
I'll now ask you some questions about your concerns in relation to your mother's care and treatment. Firstly, I'm going to ask you about your mother's diagnoses. You state in your witness statement at paragraph 5, if you'd like to refer to it, that your mother's initial diagnosis was bipolar affective disorder and resistant depressive disorder. You further state that a further diagnosis of enduring personality changes following mental illness was made later down the line.
Yeah.
Were you aware of those diagnoses before your mother died?
To an extent, it was always very, very unclear and felt very kind of, there was a lot of flitting between the diagnoses, and it also felt the diagnoses changed when the doctor changed. So, yes, it didn't really feel like the diagnosis was necessarily driving what was happening, and if the diagnosis changed, I would question as to, I didn't really get a clear answer as to why it had changed and what that would mean for kind of her treatment plan going forwards and so on, so yeah.
So following on from that point, were you provided with any information as to what those diagnoses meant, coping strategies, on how you as a family could assist your mother in dealing with those diagnoses?
Not necessarily in relation to those specific diagnoses, only to look out for the warning signs and to raise concerns through the care coordinator and go through normal channels in that way.
Adam, I'm going to ask you some questions about your mother's admission to the Linden Centre in 2015 when she was admitted with symptoms of psychosis. Was that her first admission to an inpatient mental health facility in Essex?
It was for a long time. There was a brief admission before I was born, which was kind of unrelated to this particular episode.
In your commemorative and impact statement, you stated that during this admission to the Linden Centre, you felt extremely frustrated by the failure of the staff to listen when you tried to convey to them how independent your mother had been prior to that admission.
Yeah.
And is it right that that was an informal admission, i.e. your mother wasn't sectioned under the Mental Health Act?
I believe it was an informal admission. I had to do a lot of persuading of her and people around her to try and get her to make the right choice, because she was, I'd seen her low, I'd seen her anxious prior to this, but I'd never seen the extent of the psychosis around the inanimate objects talking to her, thinking like someone was going to come and kill her, and so on. I think in terms of not being, it felt very much she was just being housed there and not necessarily being pushed to get better. And it felt from my side it was really hard to convey what she was normally like a year, 2-3 years earlier, which was she was a full-time teaching assistant, she ran our kind of family household, she had done qualifications with the University of Cambridge in special educational needs, she used to be very physically able and at this point kind of wasn't, and it just felt there was a lack of understanding of the extent of the deterioration and an acknowledgement around the that something had gone seriously wrong, and there was a need to get her back to how she was before. But it almost felt like there was no going back, and it was just, this is how she is. We'll make sure she doesn't do anything silly, and that's it.
Would you like to say any more specifically about the failure of staff at the Linden Centre to listen to you?
There was a, not necessarily a failure to listen, but a point around alternative treatment options that came up at the Linden Centre, and it was around where she was non-compliant with her oral medication, and she would either forget to take it, not want to take it, feel like it wouldn't make any difference, and I would really be thinking what else is there to do. There must be an alternative option, and it just happened to be that my wife is a medical doctor, and we would have conversations around what other, if there were any other options that hadn't been thought of. And on that, my wife suggested that I mention a depot injection to try and reduce the dependency of her taking oral medication. And it felt very much as if that had not been considered by the clinicians. And it wasn't a matter of, no, we're not going to do that, we've already talked about that, and we're not doing it because. It was very much, it felt like I had provided that suggestion. My wife is not a psychiatrist or involved in psychiatry, and that we had put that forward. It was considered, and then it ended up being part of the treatment plan.
So you're suggesting that they weren't proactive
Correct.
in exploring what treatments might be available?
Correct. If it was always throughout the whole period of this, her illness, it was always very, very reactive and not proactive. And there was a second specific example with this as well around the medication, again, not having its desired impact. And my wife suggested the use of ECT, electrotherapy. And again, I remember the meeting around, and I've got the notes kind of from Maxine about questions for me to ask the clinicians. And it was almost the same thing around, it's not like we've considered this, and we're not doing it because. It was actually, they pondered on it and did it. And it felt very much like that was not thought of as part of an alternative treatment. And that it was very much me specifically as someone who's completely out of the medical field, and my wife who's not related to the psychiatric field of medicine, coming up with these ideas and yes, kind of adhered to, but why should it have got to that point in the first place? And again, thinking about the other families and other individuals who might not have someone with medical experience related to them, and what would have happened if those treatment options hadn't been considered. And again, the other people who might, if they had the knowledge or the, not drive is the wrong word, but the kind of the will to challenge the professionals about whether there are other alternative treatment options for their families. So yes, it felt very much like we were driving the family were driving the care, not the clinicians driving the care.
Helpfully, you've covered the next topic that I wanted to cover with you very comprehensively, but just to clarify the timeline in terms of those two suggestions of treatment from you. I think you say in your statement that the depot injection suggestion came from you during the admission to the Linden Centre in 2015, and the ECT suggestion was during the admission to the Derwent Centre in 2017.
Sure,
Is that right?
That sounds about right, yeah. Can I also just come back on your diagnosis point quickly?
Of course.
I just thought of something just around how there was also quite a lot of physical side effects that she had later down the line, probably 2 or 3 years before she died, around, and again it's in the statement, around hunched back, drooped face, to the point where I inquired at one point whether she'd had a stroke. and things like that. Lost dexterity in her hands to really even do her shoelaces up and basic. She used to be a competitive cyclist as kind of a younger person, cycled to and from work until she became ill, and she couldn't do any form of kind of fast or physical activity that required coordination. And I never quite got an answer as to that was never diagnosed, and I never really got a concrete reason as to why that was happening, and it was kind of just left to almost be it's just kind of one of the, your mum's a complex case, it's just one of the things that's going to happen with all the medication she's on, but it was never really, was it a side effect of the mental health illness, was it a side effect of the medication, was it something completely unrelated that wasn't being addressed? So there was just something on there that I wanted to bring up.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you some questions now about your mother's last mental health inpatient admission prior to her death. As I've said, you explain in your witness statement that from 2015 onwards, you recall that she was in and out of hospital. You've discussed the 2 admissions in 2015, 2017. You confirmed to me this afternoon during a discussion that looking at the documentation that you have from the inquest, you believe the last time your mother was admitted prior to her death was the 28th of May to the 15th of July 2020 at the Derwent Centre, pursuant to Section 3 of the Mental Health Act. Is that right?
Correct.
And on that occasion, do you recall, were you as a family consulted about the discharge decision?
So that particular, I can't recall the actual finer details of that particular discharge, and I think it was also during COVID when it was all very kind of locked down and things like that. The general, my views during the discharge process and also in any other discharge meeting were very. I don't think my views or the views of my family were considered in discharge meetings. There was a point where at the Linden, one of her admissions in the Linden Centre, she had basically over these years of engagement with the services she had learned who to say certain things to avoid being sectioned or put in or admitted to the ward. And which is why you'll see in the statement that she says certain things to some people and certain things to other people. So she knew if she was talking to that sanctuary manager, she's going to say, no, I'm not going to kill myself, when a minute before that she's talking to a worker who she knows won't necessarily have the decision-making power to admit her. She will say, I'm going to kill myself in front of a train tonight. And the same with the consultants. She knew exactly what to say to the consultant psychiatrists to avoid either being admitted in the first place, sectioned in the first place, or being discharged, about being discharged. And it got to the point where at the Linden Centre there was one particular discharge meeting where she was being explicit to me. She had exactly what she wanted to do. She wanted to throw herself in front of a train. That hadn't changed. She was being really, really verbal about it and telling the psychiatrist something completely different. And I knew from previous discharge meetings that they would only really just take her word for, I don't want to live anymore, but I'm not going to do anything. Great, let's discharge her. And I knew if that was going to happen, it would be a real significant risk. So I actually went to I got to the point of asking her closest friends and family, including myself, to write formal letters to the psychiatrist. And I brought them with me to the discharge meeting. And it actually went from her being discharged to her being kept admitted for another kind of 2-3 weeks, at which point she actually had become definitely not better, but was in a better state and a slightly less crisis state. And that for me kind of summarised how without that level of kind of galvanising almost a group of people and having it formally written on paper, how you had to go that far to almost say, I'm being serious here, like, you need to listen, because if you don't listen, something bad is going to happen. Which, I mean, we can talk about the incident itself later, but that's exactly what happened and why she died, because of a failure to listen to views of the people who knew exactly what was going through her mind. But yes, it was on the discharge meetings as well, in terms of what to look out for, it was very much call the care coordinator, she's got Samaritans, she's got crisis, but it was, the warning signs were always there. That's my point, is that in either all of or almost all of her discharge meetings, the warning signs for me were always well above where they should be for someone who's going to be discharged to the community. So she was still attending train stations. She was still talking explicitly how she wants to kill herself. And actually, no matter how much I raised that as a concern that she would actually do something, it was always deemed as too low risk to be admitted or to even have the home treatment team involved.
When you say no matter how much you raise that as a concern, is that at discharge meetings specifically, or
all the time in any interaction? So, for example, with that call to the call that I made to the care coordinator around where was it in the statement?
28th. I think we will turn to that.
But we're going to come to that later.
So we
fine.
can go through.
Yeah, fine.
Just finishing up on this line of questioning and just following that through.
Yeah.
When you refer to the occasion where you essentially stopped the discharge for a period of 2 weeks, was that an informal admission to the Derwent Centre in 2018?
That sounds about right.
I want to briefly turn to lack of planned action, and then I promise we will get on to the call and all of your key concerns as we go through. You state that following your mother's depot injection appointment on the 4th of January 2022, the clinician emailed your mother's consultant psychiatrist to ask if they'd consider your mother's case ahead of the planned appointment on the 3rd of February.
Yeah.
But nothing was actioned and she wasn't seen ahead of that scheduled appointment. It's paragraph 20, if you'd like to refer to it. Do you know what side effects are you referring to there? Given the side effects.
From what I remember, it was those physical side effects that I mentioned about to do with the diagnosis. So the broad picture of how she presented was, when she first started becoming ill, she was still physically active, but it was very much kind of mania, anxiety, and then kind of a period of being low and then depressed. But then probably, I don't know, we're talking over an 8-year period, maybe 3 years before she died, 4 years before she died, these physical symptoms started happening where, like pretty much what I said before, so kind of literally a drooped face, mouth kind of hanging open, hunched over, gained a huge amount of weight, was always very, very conscious of her weight, but gained a huge amount of weight, and loss of kind of, dexterity and coordination. And that was where I said, like, at least prior to these physical symptoms, she was physically able. She was mentally ill. She was really in a horrible place mentally, but she could at least go to the shop, take herself for a walk, do basic life things like do her shoelaces and things like that. I remember vividly like having to do her, like me and her partner had to do her shoes for her, and he had to dress her, shower her, and things like that. At least prior to this, she was able to physically look after herself despite being depressed.
And have you ever been provided to date with any reason as to why that wasn't actioned and she wasn't reviewed by her consultant psychiatrist sooner?
No.
Did anybody concede that that was a side effect of drugs?
No. I never got a clear response as to why that was happening. And also, in answer to your question around, do I know if anything happened? I didn't even know that this has obviously come from the records, and I didn't know that this request for an early meeting had happened. And when I read this whole series back, I was raising my own concerns, and I thought my concerns on their own warranted an admission, let alone when I went through the inquest and all of this has come out from other professionals. So no, I didn't know that, but it doesn't surprise me that happened.
And just staying on the topic of medication for a moment, did you have any other concerns? You've mentioned side effects, but did you have any other concerns about your mother's medication generally?
It did just feel very kind of trial and error around, this hasn't worked for an X period of time, let's try this. This hasn't worked, let's try this. Or it would go, I would suggest something based on what my wife has said for me to ask. And then that happened. So it was very much kind of on almost like a rotation of let's try these different things. Whereas in my opinion, I feel like, again, coming back to the reactive, not proactive theme, I feel like there could have been much simpler therapeutic and kind of psychological intervention right at the very early stages of when she only really presented with mania and anxiety. And it was very much left to get worse and worse and worse and worse. So, yeah, I don't think... I can't remember your original question. What was the original question?
You've answered it, thank
I've
you.
answered it, great.
Yeah, I asked about concerns in relation to medication generally.
Yeah.
So you said trial and error.
No, apart from the trial and error stuff, yeah. As in, I just felt like she was left to get as bad as she was. That even I started to become convinced that I'm not the medication on its own is just not going to shift this.
Thank you. Turning to your concerns in relation to clinicians not properly considering information that you've provided, and you've touched on this a little already. You've referenced the call that you made to your mother's care coordinator. If you'd like to refer to it, Adam, it's paragraph 24.
Yeah, go on.
And it's the 24th of January 2022, whereby you clearly reported that she'd been sitting at train stations again and was thinking if she runs and jumps, that will end her life.
Yeah.
You state in your statement you were not reassured, despite the fact that it states clearly there that you were reassured, and you felt extremely worried, but you didn't know what else you could do to make the clinicians take on board how unwell your mother was.
Yeah.
Can you recall what the care coordinator said to try and reassure you?
This was a real pivotal point for me. So this was mum going from, I want to kill myself in front of a train, I don't want to live anymore, to talking about specific, like the detail of how she was going to do it and the thinking behind it. So she would explicitly, what's been written here by the care coordinator is slightly wrong in terms of mum was telling me, I've been thinking, and this is kind of a casual conversation as if you were talking about what you'd had for dinner. I'm trying to work out if I run and jump or if I just jump from the edge, what's going to have a higher success rate. And that's the first time she had talked to me about that level of detail, and in such a candid way that obviously raised alarm bells in my head. And this was the day before this call, that evening before this call. I went out for dinner with her and she told me this. And then obviously I've gone to work the following day, and I remember calling probably like every minute, an hour before the offices opened to get a hold of the care coordinator, and got through and said this, and the response was that we still deem the risk to be not. I was basically saying she has to be sectioned, or she has to be admitted, or there has to be some kind of significant increase in intervention here. And the response was it's not high risk enough, let alone for a section, let alone for admission, and not necessarily even home. Sorry, maybe I'm thinking of crossing over with another instance, but definitely not significant enough for admission or section. And my question was around, well, what is high risk enough? Like, if you've got someone who's been saying that, who's been frequenting train stations, saying they want to kill themselves in front of a train, and she's telling me exactly how she's going to do it, and I'm supposed to be one of her protective factors, I specifically asked what would be high enough, and the response was kind of attending every day or multiple times a day or being on the track itself. At which point I was just blown away by that response around, that's obviously why people die in these situations, because you've given it one chance to too many, And again, is exactly what has actually happened. And yeah, I couldn't believe there was kind of an arbitrary number on that would lead to some kind of admission or some kind of section. And yeah, go on.
And is that what brings you to the view there in your statement where you say that you just felt they didn't take on board how unwell your mother was because you were telling them this information and then you were presented with an explanation as to how she could be more unwell, for example?
And so this crosses over two themes really. It's one, the listening to me and family members, and two, the risk assessment process. That if and I remember I'm a public sector professional in a school, and very much being like, I have told you this, I am trusting you to make this right decision. I completely disagree with you. I think it is a section, I think it is an admission. If you are saying, as the mental health professional here, that is not an admission, like, I'm not happy about it, but like, you need to know I'm trusting you effectively with my mum's life here. And that obviously, this whole process has completely broken all trust with what kind of mental health clinicians would say to me if this was to happen again in the future.
Were you provided with any information or guidance at the end of that call as to what to do or what the next steps would be? Do you recall? It
was just always the same. Just kind of, if you're worried about something again, call them again. If mum's got the crisis number to call, the Samaritan's line to call if she needs to, and basically just to keep an eye. And again, I was just like, well, okay, fine. What if she does this again? What if she does run and jump tomorrow and is successful? Like, I didn't necessarily say that to them, but that was what's going through.
Sorry. Yes. You spoke earlier about her ability to identify who she spoke to and what she said to them.
Yeah.
Do you think that played a part in their slight dismissing of you and your concerns and anxieties?
100%. Yeah, 100%.
So they had taken everything she said at face value.
Correct. That is absolutely correct.
Thank you.
But then there's also the flip side where she's clearly crying out for help because she is telling certain people exactly what she's going to do, but she's not telling the people who she knows are the decision makers.
Yes.
What's happening. And there was another incident around. This started to end up actually being almost reflected on me, in that she also realised that by telling me the things I've told you she's telling me, she now knows she's starting to put together that when she tells me certain things, she's getting a knock at the door the next day or she's getting a phone call the next day. And there was a particular incident, I can't remember if I'm coming on to it later or if it's if there's an opportunity to bring this up later, but there was one particular incident where she was at a train station and was going between stations trying to work out which one was the best to kind of to be successful at ending her life. And for the first time she called my brother, who also suffers with mental health concerns or anxiety, and she would deliberately not call him before because she knows that he struggles with his own mental health, and would call me because she knows I can kind of handle it and manage it. And so I started also being put into that camp of, I'm not going to call Adam now because I know what's going to happen. And it was actually only then, that was a completely traumatic time. That was her flitting between stations, my brother being on the phone to her, her not telling him where she was. He could hear the train announcer in the background, and that was a real kind of red flag around almost like, is it a goodbye phone call? And then him texting me at the time during the phone call saying, you need to call the police or you need to call someone because she's at a train station. I don't know where she is. I'm going to try and get it out of her. She was very, very selective in who she spoke to, and she knew what the outcome would be if that was the case.
Can you recall, obviously, that conversation between her and your brother was after your telephone call to the care coordinator on the 24th of January? If you can't help us any further than that, that's absolutely fine.
I can't remember where it stood in the chronology. I can probably find out.
That's okay. And your telephone call with the care coordinator on the 24th of January, was that the only telephone call or discussion that you had with a clinician that was of that nature, where you were raising concerns, or were there other calls?
No, that was definitely the one where I was most blown away. There were many. I mean, almost every call or interaction in a ward round or any kind of meeting was me saying, she's saying this and this, I believe it, and it not being, and her views being taken for face value and not mine. And like, look, I get needing to hear the patient's views and put that at the centre, but you also need to ground it in some kind of sense around there's a logic here to what she's doing.
And you say that in that call you raised your concern that she should be sectioned. Mm-hmm. Is that something that you or other family members had ever raised before, or was that the first time you were?
Yeah, again, this was part of a pattern over probably 3-4 years of times she would attend the train station frequently. Also, I know of all these times that she's attended the train station. I don't know about all the times. I don't know about all of the times. She could have attended twice as much as I think. She could have been attending every other day. But whenever there was a kind of a spike in attendances or the level of detail in what she was telling me, or the frequency of which she was telling me that she wants to end her life, yes, I would be frequently saying, not just to the care coordinator, but also to the crisis line. Because there's a bit, again, I think we're going to come to it later, on out of hours and out of hours kind of contact. And again, I remember speaking to the crisis line, I think it was on a Saturday or a Sunday, and again saying, she's saying these things, she's saying she wants to kill herself, she's saying she wants to do it in front of a train, like, and I'm worried about her mental state right now, and it just being, the risk isn't high enough. Kind of call the care coordinator on Monday and go from there.
I'm going to ask you some questions now in relation to your mother's last appointment with an EPUC clinician before she died, so the review by the consultant psychiatrist on the 3rd of February 2022. Firstly, were you in attendance at that appointment?
No, I don't believe I was.
Do you know if you were aware of it at the time?
I don't. I think I was probably aware that it happened. Yeah. But as in, no, not a fine detail.
Can you recall, and it may be that you can't, can you recall if you had any conversations with your mother after that appointment about how it went or what was discussed?
No, I can't recall, but then I think it was a pretty, from what I saw, a pretty run-of-the-mill appointment in that, sadly, I mean, like I said, when I actually saw the wider context of what's going on with other professionals' concerns, it was obviously that should have been an extraordinary meeting. But as far as I was concerned, she's been telling me very similar things for a long time. I kind of knew what the psychiatrist was going to say. She went with her partner. There's only a kind of a certain number of times I could take off work for it. But no, I wasn't aware. All I know was it was, again, deemed low risk. She was deemed low risk, and I obviously completely disagreed with it. And actually, the first time I really read those notes from that meeting, where it says she was low risk, and that I can't remember what the quote was, that no significant increase is required or whatever, was when that letter was on her doormat 2 days after she died. And I'm clearing out her flat, and I've opened this letter, and there's the quote that she's low risk.
You helpfully, at paragraph 39, you clearly state that the record of that review doesn't mention the period of crisis that your mother had been experiencing just in the days prior to that consultation. We've discussed those key events, but just to be absolutely clear, you're talking there about the contact and call on the 31st of January, where your mother reported the plan to kill herself that night, the contact with the duty worker on the 1st of February, after she reported a plan, maybe when she goes home that day.
Yeah.
And then the call on the 2nd of February, where she reported low mood. Mm-hmm. You go on at paragraph 41 to state that you consider the consultant psychiatrist failed to consider the records added in those days prior to the consultation, which showed the sustained period of crisis and repeated contact with services with direct suicidal intent with a plan.
Yeah.
It may seem obvious, but what brings you to that conclusion that the consultant failed to consider those records?
I mean, this is just, when you said about kind of appearing obvious, like, this is, I think, what I struggle with, is it was obvious. And I remember at the inquest, either said she was kind of having all of these things having happened, that she was still flagging up as kind of green or amber on the risk scale. And like I said, it appearing to be a completely run-of-the-mill, normal, routine appointment. And actually, you mentioned kind of the start of that sequence of events being on the 31st, but even kind of on the 4th of kind of the 4th, she saw the depot nurse and was suicidal. On the 24th, I'm making the call to say she's talking about running versus running and jumping. You then got the care coordinator saying there's been a significant deterioration in physical appearance and various other things. You then got the 31st where she's saying she's calling 111, saying thinking of jumping in front of a train. I've got here kind of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 kind of calls to various professionals, saying exactly what she wants to do. And yes, that, like, how can you not hear all of those things and go, this person needs significant intervention immediately? And yes, it appears that the consultant didn't see that and didn't have that information, and neither did I. Otherwise I would have been pressing kind of almost far more than I already was, which I already felt was far too much. But it's almost sad to know that if I already felt too involved, but if I had known about these instances, I could have actually kind of maybe had a further intervention and been really shining this in his eyes, going, like, are you seeing this? Like, this needs something different.
And we'll turn to the inquest in a moment, but I think that was a finding that came out of the inquest, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Likewise, you state that the consultant psychiatrist failed to consider whether your mother required referral to the Home First team. Again, that's something that came out at the inquest, isn't it?
Yes, and this just screams to me kind of complacency, and I wanted to just kind of find my notes. So there was talk of referral to home treatment, and then there was it came across very much like a corridor conversation around the care coordinator having a conversation with the consultant, saying, should we, shouldn't we? And from memory, no actual referral happening to even be rejected. So it's not even like, if the referral was made to home treatment, and it was rejected, I would have had problems with that. The fact that it wasn't even put in the first place is an even bigger concern. And there's kind of bits that are just really horrible to kind of read in the notes, saying that kind of because she was, I've got the notes here somewhere, that because she was known to Home First. Here we go, yeah, so like kind of 33D, on my notes, 33D, I think I might be a paragraph out, is an ongoing thought about killing herself in front of a train. Amanda's well known, and kind of because she's well known, our Home First treatment, our Home First team have decided, have not accepted the request to make a referral because of her history. So you've got all of these things, and again, I come back to the question, well, what would have meant a referral to Home First was appropriate? Like, if her saying she wants to kill herself 2 nights in front of a train to 3 or 4 different professionals and her family, and that all being logged on a medical system, and then Home First, which is the intermediate level of intervention, is not deemed serious enough. Again, I keep asking the question, well, what is? Okay, so she's been presenting like this for 7 or 8 years, so just because that's normal, that doesn't mean any further intervention is required. And she's not done it before. So she's visited lots of stations, she's visited stations before. She's not jumped in front of a train. Well, unfortunately, like, she did.
Just sticking with that 3rd of February appointment, you note in your witness statement at paragraph 35A that the consultant recorded your mother described her sleep as fine, but 3 days previously, on the 31st of January, she reported to the crisis team that she wasn't sleeping. She was getting about 2 to 3 hours undisturbed sleep a night. And again, it may be that you aren't able to help us, but can you help us with whether she was still having problems with her sleep
Yeah, it
on
was
the 3rd
dreadful.
of February?
Yeah, it was dreadful. She was kind of, again, these are also reports from her partner, that she would be kind of pacing the house at night. She kind of went from sleeping in the bed, sleeping on the sofa. Yeah, no, it was absolutely dreadful. And again, this kind of, for me, comes back to kind of the picking and choosing as to what she's kind of describing and how much of a concern she wants to portray herself as. And again, in that meeting as well, I'm saying she's picking and choosing. There's also still big red flags here in terms of her saying she rates her mood as 0 out of 10, and prior to that it was 2 out of 10, and so on. And again, you see that in that paragraph, she strongly denied any intention to jump in front of a train. She's saying that to the consultant because she knows exactly what the consultant will do if she says something different. And he doesn't know, because of not looking at the system, or the system failing somewhere, he doesn't know that she has said that to healthcare professionals, multiple healthcare professionals in multiple different areas.
And it's also recorded at paragraph 35A that the consultant noted there were no major side effects with her current medication. So does that go to the point that you were making earlier about the lack of clarity as to whether the symptoms, the physical symptoms she was suffering, were a side effect of medication or otherwise?
Some of it just doesn't make sense. Like, she was hunched over, mouth open, slow moving, and again, I come back to kind of there being a general sense of the person that's and this comes back to my point about the Linden Centre, the person that's presenting in front of the healthcare teams at that moment is like that person's always been like that. That's what it feels like. It feels like there's a lack of understanding of how much of a decline that person's experience, because she did go through different consultant psychiatrists as well, and I can't remember exactly when the physical symptoms kind of started and the consultant psychiatrist changed, but it probably was around the same time. But yeah, there's definitely, it's a ridiculous kind of comment to make that she didn't have kind of side effects or symptoms.
Thank you. And at paragraph 37A, you state that the care plan after that meeting was that your mother would be reviewed by the consultant again in 4 months. Do you know whether she was happy with that plan?
She didn't want to engage with the services, so ultimately she wanted to kill herself. So as little involvement with the services as possible was preferable for her. Although, like I said, there were obviously these flashes of cries for help where she has called the crisis line, or she has called Samaritans or me or someone. But no, I think she was very consigned to, I'm either going to be like this for the rest of my life or I'm going to kill myself. Like, that was it.
And do you know, was she due to have contact with any other clinicians in that 4-month interim period?
Only,
so her care coordinator,
yeah, only
and the
that
depot
kind of
injections?
Yeah, exactly. Those routine appointments.
And did you have a view as to the plan at that stage? Can you recall?
No, it just it was just very, very like stuck in a rut. She doesn't seem to be getting any better. No one's really understanding what I'm saying and the seriousness of what I'm saying, or seeing through what she's saying. And it was just doing what we can do, just me and her partner, just kind of keeping like him actually watching her, kind of like making sure he knows where her whereabouts are, me calling, and things like that. It almost felt like we had to do the best we could, but we can't watch all the time.
No. very briefly on, we know that that was her last consultation with an EPUC clinician. That was the 3rd of February, and we know that she died on the 12th of February. Would you like to say anything about the 9-day period there before she died? Any contact that you had with her, how she seemed?
She was just, I think a couple of things. She was just clearly like so unwell. Like it was just plainly obvious. She was doing her normal things. She was like she made a friend on the ward from a previous admission. She saw that friend. And then, as far as I'm concerned, she went to the station on the 12th of February, like any other time she'd been to the station, and this was she had that 1% extra motivation and effort to do it, which is my problem in that could have happened on any of these other previous occasions. It just happened to be on the 12th of February she had that slight wave of, or maybe it was that one time where I've now been here 20 times, I've now got the confidence to do it. But no, as far as I'm concerned, it was like any other normal visit to the station.
Turning now to the inquest into your mother's death, you say at paragraph 47 that took place between the 13th and 15th of December 2023.
Correct.
And the coroner recorded a narrative conclusion that your mother died by suicide, however, recorded there were plainly interventions that could have been taken and would have served to protect her from the known risk of suicide, and not considering those contributed to her death.
Correct.
You have set out those failed interventions very clearly in your witness statement, and what I'd like to do is just go through those with you now and see if there's anything further that you would like to say in relation to each of them. It may be that you're happy that we've covered that area, of course, that's okay.
Yeah.
So firstly, and I'm at paragraph 48B, the level of risk that she presented with was not sufficiently appreciated and addressed. They were aware of the risk that she would kill herself by jumping in front of a train. Plans were drawn up. There was an increase in risky behaviours, but that didn't lead to sufficient changes in the clinical response. Would you like to say anything further in respect of risk assessments or failure to properly risk assess?
Yeah, so I mean, it was for me like a lack of complete information around where this information or where this logging is coming from other people, a failure from the consultant, if the system operates in that way, a failure of the consultant to find it rather than just kind of relying on, let's open up her record, okay, nothing immediate pops up right here, I'm just going to go ahead. There was, in terms of risk assessment, like actual kind of like risk assessment procedures, the inquest highlighted that they just weren't used, and I can't help but think that having some kind of systematic process of assessing risk there was needed. And it all sounds fine in the inquest where they're saying there's an MDT and we're all kind of professionals around the table evaluating risk, but when you've got 6 or 7 or 8 instances 2 weeks, 3 weeks before she dies saying she's going to kill herself and exactly how she's going to do it, and then I vividly remember in the inquest her is saying that she was either still highlighted as green, I think it was green, but possibly amber, i.e. not kind of a major concern. That's a big worry. And
sorry, Adam,
yeah,
just to stop you there, but just touching on something that you've just raised in terms of the reference to the notes, what you're referring to there is the coroner's finding that they didn't appear chronologically for clinicians to review. It was based on team. And so because it was different teams, those notes weren't necessarily appearing for the consultant up front and centre, if you like.
So the depot nurse would log a concern on her system, the sanctuary worker would log a concern on their system, and those, that they were in different, they were filed away in different areas of the system that the consultant couldn't clearly see. There was also a mention around protective factors and what protective factors would stop her doing that. Well, the protective factors that were listed were me and my brother, And I explicitly asked her on numerous occasions, like, to try and understand the rationale and her level of seriousness. Would the impact on me and my brother stop you doing it? Or kind of imagine, and again, I've already mentioned my brother struggles with his own mental health. What would the impact on his mental health after you did this? Have you thought about that? Like, I wanted to actually just understand if she had considered the impact, and she very much had considered the impact. It was her. It was. She had such a high level and drive to end her life. She was willing to put, and this is coming from my mum loved us very, very, very much. She was willing to put us through that so she could end her life. Like, that's how miserable her life was. So when we're listed as protective factors, I'm not convinced that it was enough. I mean, it wasn't enough.
And Adam, just touching on the last two missed interventions that the coroner set out, 48C, no formal referral to the home treatment team. We've touched on that already. And then 48C also, the change from your mother merely talking about, in essence, hypothetically ending her life to the specifics or to doing it that day.
Yeah.
And not appreciating that change in risk.
Yeah.
Did you attend the inquest?
I did.
Yes. Were you legally represented?
Yes.
And was there a jury? Was it just the
No.
coroner?
Just the coroner.
We know that a prevention of future deaths report was made by the coroner, dated the 19th of December 2023, and you've helpfully listed that in the documents that you have on page 23 of your witness statement.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to go through the three findings in that report, simply because when we turn to your recommendations, they actually follow on from
Sure.
those findings and recommendations.
Yeah.
So we'll deal with it all together when we come to your recommendations.
Mhm.
But in short, they relate to the fact that, as you've said, the notes don't show continuously in chronological order. The fact that risk management tools weren't used, and the fact that there were occasions where your mother's attendances at the railway station were not passed on by British Transport Police to the care coordinator and treating clinicians.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Just to add on to that as well, there's a point around it all looked well and good, the British Transport Police plan with the trust. It's kind of we've got this procedure in place, we've got this system in place to inform everyone. There was no factoring in of it being an unmanned station. And that's something that really came out of this. It's like you see all these things, you're kind of reassured, and then the things that are supposed to be happening aren't happening, which are people relaying to the healthcare professionals that she's attending, and then you've actually got the point that no one's even thought about that the station she's regularly going to has no staff.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's also issues there.
And have you ever received an update from the trust as to any actions that they've taken in response to that report?
I have had responses to the PFD. I can't remember exactly if it said what they had done or what they will do. I can't remember.
And is that the trust's formal response to the PFD rather than a separate individual response to you as a family member?
Formal response, yeah.
Adam, I'm finally going to turn to your recommendations for change, but I'm conscious that we've been going for an hour. Would you prefer to continue now for another 15, 20 minutes and go through those recommendations, or would you like a break?
No, that's fine, we can continue.
Go through. It's important that we make clear that obviously these are your preliminary views based on the documentation that you do have.
Yeah.
You may feel that as we go through, we've addressed everything on these issues that you would like to, and that's absolutely fine. But I want to provide you with an opportunity to say everything that you'd like to in respect of your recommendations. Mm-hmm. Just to assist, please can we put up the recommendations on the screen? So page 19, paragraph 51 of Adam's statement, please. Thank you. So at paragraph 51 at the bottom of the page, I'm grateful, thank you. We can see there, Adam, you recommend clinicians should work with families to ensure they understand what is really going on and to take concerns expressed by families seriously.
Yeah.
Now, I know you've covered this heavily in your evidence, but is there anything further that you'd like to say about how clinicians failed to listen to you or your family in relation to Mandy's care and treatment?
Nothing further apart from just to really, I suppose, summarise that I feel that we are the people you need to listen to, and we will always treat. It felt you had to work extremely hard. Like I said, like the kind of gathering of letters from friends and family. It required that level of documentation and effort to even start to feel listened to, and yeah, just really being treated as kind of secondary opinions.
Do you have any views on engagement with family in terms of the risk assessment process and whether that happened in Mandy's case? I'm really not sure what the risk assessment process is. All I've got is glimpses into it from the inquest. So yes, I really think actually seeing the concrete kind of what are you using to decide this level of risk, and then the level of intervention is needed. Thank you. Please, can we have it there, paragraph 52, the next paragraph. Your second recommendation is to create a better risk assessment tool, as the current risk assessments are woefully inadequate. I think the first thing to raise there is that it came out at the inquest, didn't it, that actually those tools that were available were not used.
Correct.
Would you like to say anything further about risk assessment tools that you feel should have been used, or resources that should have been used in Mandy's case?
I just think probably just to pull together what I've already said is just how are you getting all the information from various different systems? How are the family's views being treated in this? What's the weighting? Kind of like is the family views just a side comment, or is it a real central factor? Like I said, the protective factors element I think was not enough. I mean, for me, it just is whatever risk assessment process has happened in this case is farcical, because you can't read this case and understand this case and then not appreciate how ill she was and that some serious intervention was needed and didn't happen. And the risk assessment process said she was okay.
And just to be clear, when you refer to what weighting should be afforded to families' views, in your view, what weighting should families' views be afforded?
I don't know. It depends how you're going to measure it. But I mean, I feel like if my views were taken into account, we wouldn't be in this situation. So I mean, it needs to be equal. It needs to be equal, if not more, to the clinicians. Not necessarily with obviously management plans, but in terms of realising the level of risk.
Yeah. Please, can we have paragraph 53 on the screen over on page 20? Thank you. Your third recommendation is that appropriate services should be available out of hours, and by that you mean qualified staff on duty who can access medical history and make informed decisions about how to manage crisis situations. We've touched briefly on out of hours.
Yeah.
Is there anything further that you'd like to say in respect of?
Yeah, there is. It was really I don't know if it was coincidence or what, but most crises happened out of hours. Like I said, with the call I made to the care coordinator the following day from when Mum's saying the night before that whether she's going to run and jump or just jump. It was draining to have to. Even though the person on the end of the crisis phone line has the notes, there's so much more context to a case than just reading the person on the other end of the phone reading through the notes. And I felt like I had to re-explain 8 years of history to someone on the end of the phone to get them to realise again, because all they're going to see is the consultant's opinions that she's low risk. Okay, well, if the consultant's saying she's low risk, then what this guy's saying is kind of fine, but we don't need to act on it urgently. Speak to the care coordinator on Monday, rather than let's do something about this now. There was a particular incident I had for this that really kind of summarised it for me, which was Mum went into. She was having a mental health crisis and also a really severe leg infection, and I remember the care coordinator kind of saw her, decided she needed to go to A&E for the leg, and said she would relay to A&E that once she had kind of got the appropriate physical medication for that she would then need to be assessed by the Derwent Centre, the mental health part of the hospital. And the next I know, she comes out of her physical meeting with A&E, and there's been no communication to the Derwent Centre, and this is after hours at this point, and she's standing in a hospital gown in the car park with me, and I'm like, she's still in this mental health crisis. And when she can see that I'm on the phone to I can't remember who it was. I think it was crisis or the duty worker or someone, to basically say this message that you said was going to be passed to the Derwent Centre has not come through because A&E is saying they don't know anything. And she can see that I'm doing that. She's then shouting and screaming at me in the car park and running around the car park in a hospital gown. I then have to call hospital security. And then it ends up with me having to call the police and trying to get the police to effectively section her. And this was probably 3 hours of her running around, like highly distressed.
And what happened in the end?
The police kind of basically were around her near a busy road, basically effectively waiting for her to calm down. And she calmed down to the point she then got in my car, went to her partner's, I drove her to her partner's house where she was living, and the following day, I think I'm not mistaken, the following day she was sectioned. And the care coordinator said that the police should have sectioned. First of all, she said, I don't know why the breakdown in communication happened in the first place. Then the police should have sectioned her. And then actually, during working hours the next day, she was sectioned. And again, I can't remember if it was a section or if it was an admission, but she went to hospital. And it was just another incident, another time where I said, this has to happen. Otherwise, we're going to be in real trouble. It didn't. It caused an extreme amount of distress. And then it's always, the thing I recommend in the first place ends up happening anyway, just 2 or 3 days later. And in this particular case, on the 12th of February, they didn't quite catch up in time.
Do you know, you said she may have been sectioned or she may not. Do you know if that was the 2020 sectioned admission, her last admission?
It was during COVID, so yeah, highly likely, yes.
Thank you. You can see on the screen in front of you there, at paragraph 54, you've set out your fourth recommendation. We've touched heavily on this, but just for completeness, it's that there needs to be a change in the way patient records are kept, because as came out at the inquest, the consultant could not see the reports in chronological order made by NHS professionals outside of the team without actively searching for them in different areas. Would you like to say anything further on that, or are you happy that that's been covered?
Nothing really, apart from the fact that I've said the risk assessment process is clearly flawed, and I would really love to think that if that information had been available in chronological order and easily accessible to the consultant, that the risk assessment process would have had a different outcome and then more intervention would have been put in place. However, saying that, I'm still sceptical as to whether the appropriate level of intervention would have been put in place, even with that complete information.
And finally, Adam, there at paragraph 55, your final recommendation is that you're unsure if any concerns raised by you via phone calls or emails were acted upon or logged. So in your view, there should be a more formal way of raising concerns about clinical decisions or lack of healthcare professional action and logging the concerns to ensure they're recorded and taken seriously. Would you like to provide any further examples of concerns that you raised that you fear were not logged?
I think it was more just I had concrete experience of there being real problems in this system and trust in the system being eroded, and my job kind of means that I don't often, like the time when I got those letters from friends and family and so on, I don't always have the time to have that level of engagement to really try and get my point across, and sometimes it really was kind of, I'm at work, she's told me this thing the night before, I need to call and I need to relay this to the team, and I need to trust that the team are going to deal with it. There was a worry with the gaps that I had seen across her care around, if I told this to reception and reception said they're going to pass it on, are they? If I tell the care coordinator this, is it being logged on the system? And almost in the back of my head, I am thinking, I can almost see what's going to happen, where this is going to end up. She is going to die, and I wanted to know that the concerns I had raised verbally over the phone or via email were kind of being centrally kept, and that information was passed to the right people and acted on in the appropriate way. But yeah, it felt like there was kind of no closing of the feedback loop there.
Is it fair to say on that point as well, you raised earlier an inaccuracy, for example, in the 24th of January call, you were very clear that what you were reporting was that your mother was deciding whether to run and jump or just jump, and which would likely be more successful, and that hasn't been reflected in the notes.
Exactly that. And on that particular call, like, I was worried that call wouldn't be logged at all. But yeah, it's exactly that kind of thing. Whether there is kind of an online platform that patients and their family can see what official kind of concerns have been logged or what people have referred to, I don't know, but some kind of formal way of seeing what's been raised.
Thank you. Please can we take down the statement? Adam, thank you so much. That concludes my questions for the moment. Chair, do you have any questions to conclude?
No, I haven't got any questions, but I'd like to say thank you very much indeed for your time and thoughtfulness and answering these questions. Thank you. Thank you to your wife too for coming.
Adam, we're going to take a 10-minute break just to see if we have any further questions. Before I do, I'm going to put up on the screen the image of your mother, just because if we don't have any questions, we can let you go.
Yeah.
So please can we put up the photograph of Mandy? Thank you. Please can we take the image down? Chair, we'll break for 10 minutes to see if there's any questions. If we don't have any questions, we'll resume tomorrow morning at 10 a.m, where we'll hear from 3 further witnesses in relation to the care and treatment received by their family members. Those witnesses are Karen Pym, Janet Carden and Patrick Brennan.
So if there are no questions, we'll reconvene at 10 tomorrow.
Yes, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.